The rich woman woke up tied to a tree surrounded by wolves. And after 5 minutes, a child's voice could be heard behind her. The pre-evening light played with the young emerald green of the forest, stretching on both sides of the road. The coarse-grained surface perfectly gripped the tires, and the car flew down the deserted road at this hour without obstacles, so she'd get home faster than expected. Claire was completely satisfied with life. This day had ended wonderfully. She had secured a lucrative contract, handled everything even faster and better than expected, and now returned home with a calm spirit, humming some tune to herself. She had a substantial amount of money in her briefcase. Some might say it was madness to carry such sums without security. But Claire didn't think so. Firstly, no one knew she was traveling with that much money, and secondly, she wasn't on a bus. Who could possibly take money from her in the car? Even she, setting off on this business trip, didn't know if she'd return victorious or defeated. And now everything had turned out so well. Well, how could she not sing? Suddenly her car seemed to stumble on the straight road. She pulled over to the shoulder and braked. Apparently, a tire had blown out. Yes, there couldn't be such a thing as everything going well. Something would definitely spoil the celebration. She got out of the car, circled it, and saw that the situation was much more serious. Both front tires were punctured. But why? How could this happen? She walked around the car and noticed that indeed, the puncture was not accidental. There were some spikes lying on the road that she had driven over. Claire had barely taken out her phone when 3 people emerged from the forest, and from their faces, it was clear they weren't here to help. Apparently, they had entirely different goals. "Good day, madam," one of them said. "Had a little mishap, haven't you?" "Unfortunately, we can't help, we're not mechanics. But we can relieve you of some unnecessary burden." "Stop talking nonsense," interrupted another older bandit, addressing Claire. "Hand over the phone, then we'll talk." She realized she wouldn't be able to get rid of these scoundrels and was glad to lose some of her belongings, but to keep the main thing, her life, of course. So, trying to appease them, she handed over the phone without a word and added, "I have everything that's mine in the purse, in the car." She turned back towards the car, but they blocked her path. "We'll take the purse, don't worry," said the apparent leader. "But most importantly, that little briefcase." "No, that's not mine," Claire exclaimed despairingly, realizing she was about to lose everything. "I get it, it's not yours, it's ours. Calm her down, Phil." And from behind, Phil struck Claire on the head. The world plunged into darkness. Here is the continuation of the translation. She woke up already in twilight and didn't immediately remember what had happened. One thing was clear, she was in the forest, her back against a tree, unable to move properly because she was tied up, completely helpless. She couldn't move her hands or feet. She had clearly been dragged far from the road, as there was no sign of light between the trees. People rarely wandered here, so she had every chance of dying right here from hunger, cold, thirst, or the mosquitoes that were already gathering for a feast. Screaming would probably be useless. But what could she do? At the same time, she felt she wasn't alone, someone else was nearby. And this someone wasn't likely to be friendly. Claire heard a quiet but menacing growl, and it seemed like there were multiple living creatures because the growling was coming seemingly from all sides. "Oh my God," she whispered plaintively, trembling. How could this have happened to her? Just recently, she had been completely happy and content with life, and now it seemed she would be devoured by some wild animals. She peered into the bushes growing around her and saw some frightening glints. Those were the eyes of wolves. There were at least 3 of them. The presence of wolves in the forest alongside humans was well known. Thus, she, a successful businesswoman not long ago, would simply become food for wild animals. Well, maybe that was even better. She wouldn't have to die a long, agonizing death tied to a tree. Fear and hopelessness clouded her mind. Claire felt she was about to lose consciousness. I hope they don't eat dead people already, and besides, they don't seem to be showing any aggression. Maybe these wolves have already eaten something else, rabbits, squirrels, I don't know, maybe they stole a sheep. What nonsense is coming to my mind, she thought suddenly, and then heard a human voice. The strangest thing was that it was a child's voice, clearly not an adult's. Akela, Alba, what did you find there? Raksha, come here. The boy was clearly calling the wolves. Or were they actually dogs? Claire, as much as she could, turned her head towards the sound of footsteps and saw a child emerge from behind the bushes. The boy looked about 8 years old, small but dressed like a real hunter in camouflage clothing. Well, she must have mistaken dogs for wolves, and the boy had come with his parents, probably on a hunting trip, so there was hope of being rescued. Hey, she called out to him. Please help me. Where are your parents? Oh, said the boy. Who tied you up? Bandits, right? I'll untie you now. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the ropes that bound her to the tree. Claire sighed with relief and collapsed onto her side, massaging her stiffened arms. Yes, bandits, she whispered hoarsely. I need to get out of here as soon as possible, get to the city. Are these your dogs? Are you here with your parents? These are wolves, not dogs, but don't be afraid, they're tame. I'm here alone, and my dad is over there, in the hut in the forest. He used to be a gamekeeper and stayed here. The city is far from here, and it will be dark soon. Let me take you to our place instead. You won't get anywhere like this. Claire realized she wouldn't get anywhere in her current state. Her head was throbbing painfully, her hands and feet were swollen, and her back was sore. She cautiously stood up and obediently said, Well, okay, lead me to your hut. How do you live here in the forest? It's very simple, the boy replied confidently. It's not that bad here, actually quite good, to be honest. We're used to it. I'll continue the translation from where it left off. I hope your animals won't bite me, Claire asked apprehensively, glancing at the wolves, who seemed to be hurting her from behind. No, of course not, they're not predatory. We've raised them from when they were babies. We rescued them from poachers a year ago. My dad knows very well how to handle them, the boy replied confidently. That's good to hear. So who has been raising you since you were little? Do you always live here in the forest? You should be going to school, shouldn't you? Claire spoke, realizing she needed to say something, not knowing what to talk about with this child. It was all strange, extremely strange. And it was unknown where this boy would lead her and what kind of father lived in some hut. Well, yes, I haven't gone to school yet. Maybe someday I will, probably. I'm already good at reading, writing, and math. My dad teaches me. We live here together, we like it, and I don't want to go to the city, the boy replied. How much further is it? Claire asked. My head is spinning, it's very unpleasant. I need to sit down and have some water. Those scoundrels really hit me hard on the head. We'll be there soon, don't worry, the boy assured her. The boy walked ahead confidently with his sturdy legs clad in boots. My dad will give you water and food when we get home. Don't worry, everything is great with us, you'll see, you'll like it, he added. Yeah, I can imagine, Claire thought without much hope. Probably either a sect or some kind of psycho lives here in the woods, dragging a child along. The only hope is that he won't do anything bad to me, at least in front of his son. Though who knows? Looks like I've gotten into something big, Claire thought. Still, she asked, how far is it to the city from here? I understand it's nice here for you, but I can't always live in the forest. I have a job there, and besides, people will be looking for me. Not very far, I'll escort you to the road tomorrow, and then, well, catch a ride somehow. We don't have a car, the boy explained. And as for people looking for you, they won't find you here. I don't think anyone knows about us. Dad doesn't want strangers coming to us. Well, congratulations, I'm really going to visit a hermit or loner, Claire thought with some wry amusement. I hope he won't kill me so I won't tell anyone in the city about his hideout. I feel sorry for the boy. Well, let's see what kind of gamekeeper he is. Contrary to the boy's promise, they walked quite a long time. Perhaps it wasn't far for his feet, but Claire, a city girl used to asphalt, could barely move her legs, stumbling into pits and grabbing onto branches. But eventually, a fairly nice, not small and obviously sturdy cabin appeared. "Here is our home," the boy said, making a welcoming gesture with his hand. "Come in, we'll introduce you." The owner turned out to be a grim man maneuvering around the house in a wheelchair. The wheelchair was clearly modified for the terrain it had to navigate. The tires were large and wide. The host greeted Claire unfriendlily. Claire didn't immediately understand that it was more because he was uncomfortable with his condition rather than displeased with the guest's arrival. "Here, Dad, I rescued this lady in the woods," the boy began explaining. "Bandits stunned her and tied her to a tree, but I cut the ropes and brought her here because it was getting late to go to the city. Her head hurts, and she wants to drink." "Well done, son, for rescuing her," the man said, looking Claire over. "Sit down at the table, I'll make tea." "What kind of bandits attacked you?" "They didn't introduce themselves," Claire replied. "But somehow they must have known I would be there. I had a considerable amount of money on me. They took my phone, probably my documents, and then they hit me on the head and dragged me into the woods. They were probably hoping I'd die on my own." "That's merciful, to say the least," he remarked. "Here's your tea. Somewhere around here I have some headache pills, but I suggest sticking with the tea. It's beneficial, made with medicinal herbs." In addition to the tea, he laid out some simple but evidently nourishing food on the table. He invited his son to join them for dinner. The boy eagerly dug in, while Claire politely declined. For some reason, she didn't feel hungry at all, likely due to shock from what had happened. "And I didn't even ask your name, my rescuer." "I'm Claire, by the way, and you?" she turned to the boy. "I'm Peter," he replied. "Nice to meet you, Peter," Claire said. Claire then turned her gaze to the man, expecting him to introduce himself. "And I'm Zach," he said. Peter finished eating, drank his tea, but it was clear he didn't want to leave the table and the conversation. He probably didn't see strangers often, especially women. However, it was also noticeable that his eyes were already closing. He seemed tired from wandering in the woods and, having eaten his fill, was ready to fall asleep. "Well, forest rescuer, if you fall asleep at the table, there will be no one to carry you to bed," the father said. Claire was surprised at how his face changed when he looked at his son. He no longer looked stern or grim. It was evident that Zach loved Peter. The boy seemed to know it too and loved his father in return, as he didn't argue. He stood up, wished everyone a good night, and disappeared behind a partition. "You, too, must be ready for some sleep," Zach said to Claire. "I'll arrange something for you here, don't worry. Tomorrow, my son will escort you to the train station. It's not very close, and you could easily get lost." "Does he wander the woods alone? Isn't that dangerous?" Claire was genuinely concerned. "With our protection? Our wolves must have been seen, right?" Zach replied. "Besides, escorting him myself, as you understand, is difficult. I can drive, but not at that speed. He's used to it. We've been living here for a long time." "But how is that possible? You can't have a child living in the woods all the time. Are you only here for the summer?" Claire asked, puzzled. "No, not just that. We've been living like this for 5 years already. Even before that, we often came out here. Don't get me wrong, I'm not some forest dweller. I understand perfectly well that a child needs to live among people. Actually, I used to be a gamekeeper, but then I encountered poachers, got shot in the back, and well." He tapped his wheelchair's wheel. "Since then, for various reasons, it's been difficult for me to leave for the city, and sending him there isn't the best option either. We don't have anyone else, so his only path is to end up in an orphanage. What's it like for a child, accustomed to this life, to end up in one of those homes? Especially since I wouldn't even be able to visit him. So you might consider me selfish or whatever, But honestly, I don't know what's in store for us in the future." "And the boy's mother?" Claire asked cautiously. "Mother, you say?" "My wife ran away from us even before I got injured, so we weren't exactly living harmoniously from the start. We only got married because Peter was on the way. But when he turned 3, she ran off with her lover. We haven't heard anything from her since. I think if she knew what happened to you, she would come back, if only for her son's sake," Claire mused, genuinely baffled by the woman's behavior. She had no children of her own, but she couldn't fathom abandoning her own child, especially in such strange circumstances. "I don't think so," the host said thoughtfully. "I'm sure she wouldn't return. She didn't run off for no reason. And honestly, I don't want her to come back, because she definitely won't come back to me, and if she takes my son, he'll end up in an orphanage. I don't know how you'll see it, strange or otherwise, but she really was quite indifferent to him. I'm sorry for prying, I just feel sorry for the boy. It's not right for him to live in the woods. He won't be able to spend his whole life like this. Although I understand that he might be fine for now, but please understand." "Yes, I understand everything." Claire was surprised at herself the next morning. She felt perfectly healthy, her legs and head didn't hurt, and she was in a good mood. The host treated her to breakfast, fed his son, gave her some money to buy a ticket to the city. "It's better if you lead her to the station, Peter. You never know who you might meet on the road. It could end up worse than it did. And you can get to the city much faster and safer by train." "Thank you so much," Claire sincerely thanked him. "You have a truly wonderful place here. Can I come visit you again sometime? I feel indebted to you now. I want to repay you for how you treated me and for Peter saving me." "Of course, come visit. I can't say I'm always happy to have guests, but I won't refuse you. And don't consider yourself indebted. We helped you with all our heart," the host said. Warmly saying their goodbyes, Claire and Peter headed towards the railway station. The boy explained that it was a bit further than the road, but indeed safer. And as usual, they were accompanied by wolves. "But if people see you with such unusual pets, won't they be scared? Won't they find it strange? I think your father really doesn't want your stay in the woods to be discovered, right?" Claire asked. "It might seem that way," the boy replied, "but I won't even go to the station myself. I'll just escort you, that's all. After that, you're on your own. But don't worry, I'll keep an eye on you until you get there, and hopefully, no one will attack you. I keep the wolves away from people too. They're smart enough not to approach humans. If someone sees them from afar, they'll probably think they're dogs. And I don't want us to be noticed because of them. I don't want to move to the city either because it definitely won't work out with wolves there. I mean, where would I even send them? To a zoo? Yeah, I don't like zoos either, but nowadays there are supposedly some contact-free ones, right? Well, where the animals don't sit in cages but roam freely on the premises, almost like in the wild. Exactly, almost like that. And my wolves are used to truly roaming freely. Plus, I don't know which places are contact-free and which are traditional zoos. Besides, they wouldn't let me live in a zoo anyway, so I don't want to move to the city. Like you said yourself, we're great in the woods. And why shouldn't I live here forever?" The boy seemed sincerely puzzled about why he should leave the forest, though Claire sensed that he was curious about another life. So she broached the subject. "Well, wouldn't you like to be friends with other kids, play with them, go to school, and just live in a real apartment with a bath, electricity, where you can play on a computer, watch TV? Have you ever watched movies or cartoons?" "Of course, I used to watch them before, when we still had an apartment. And sometimes we'd visit Uncle Robert, the one who brings us groceries. He lives in the city but often comes to the forest because, he says, he can't live without it. I feel the same. And any person wouldn't be able to, if they lived like we do for a while." Claire still sensed uncertainty in his voice but understood that the boy was very accustomed to the life he had known, while the other was merely unfamiliar or seeing from afar. "I understand that you're used to this life, but don't rush to dismiss another one." "But am I really dismissing it? And it's not just about the wolves. It's just that my dad and I live in the forest. I can't leave him, and he doesn't want to go to the city. Besides, he says we don't have an apartment there now, so we wouldn't have anywhere to live. And he won't be able to get a job either because, well, you've seen. Claire felt that this conversation was weighing heavily on Peter. Despite his young age, he had probably thought about all of this more than once, so it was better not to upset him unnecessarily. She decided to do things differently, sort out her own affairs, and come visit this unusual pair sometime to talk to the boy's father about their future. And then, through her own channels, try to improve their lives. After all, the man suffered through no fault of his own. He could receive disability benefits, alimony from his ex-wife, and thus live with his son, even in a rented apartment. They walked quite a while, but time flew by during their conversation, and soon the noise of trains could be heard from behind the trees. "Well, here we are," Peter said. "I won't go any further, otherwise the wolves will lose track of me, go looking, and then there will be people. You just need to cross that field, and there's the station. Safe travels to you." "Thank you, Peter." Claire hugged him, kissed him on the cheek, and from his reaction, she understood how much this very young boy missed his mother. Poor child. His father is disabled, probably not just with his legs, and his mother ran away, Claire thought, tears welling up in her eyes. "Have you remembered the way?" Peter asked softly. "You promised to come visit. Will you?" "Of course, I'll come, but as for remembering the way, not really. I'm not great with directions in the forest. I'll just get off at this station and head that way. And if I get lost, you or your wolves will find me, right? Only, it might not be very soon. I have my own share of problems. Maybe in a week or later." "Yes, you came up with a great plan that will meet you. The main thing is for you to come, and we'll be waiting for you." They said goodbye. Claire walked to the station, and when she turned around, the little figure was no longer there. She couldn't stop thinking about the boy and his father. Only upon entering the small station building did she remember that she had her own problems to solve. Of course, those who robbed her would be sought after, but first and foremost, she wanted to understand who had found out that she was traveling with money. Could it have been leaked by someone among her colleagues or associates? The knowledge was limited to a few people, but that didn't make the search any easier. She couldn't suspect anyone. In the small waiting room, everything fit: schedules, ticket counters, and a duty station where a woman sat in front of a working television, avidly chewing sunflower seeds. Suddenly, she distracted herself from her task and shouted to someone among the staff. "Oh, Camilla, look, our area is on the news again. There's been an accident on the highway. Looks like a car caught fire." Shoo, they're talking about it now." She turned up the volume. Claire moved closer, intrigued. The car was completely burned out, but the license plates identified the owner. It's Bacardi Claire, a prominent businesswoman. Her husband recognized some metal details of her clothing and jewelry. Next on the screen appeared Dorian himself, her husband. His voice breaking, he said he didn't believe it was a random fire. Maybe she had a large sum of money with her. "I believe my wife is alive, because her body hasn't been found, and the jewelry could have been planted. The investigation is looking into the case. Police believe the woman didn't die. They have many questions for her. The missing amount didn't belong solely to her," the announcer said sternly. Other news followed, while Claire stood frozen. "Of course, I'm alive, and all my jewelry is intact. There wasn't much on me anyway, just my wedding ring and a cross necklace. Everything is here. It's unclear who identified what. And the car couldn't have caught fire on its own. It's clear they set it on fire. What questions do they have for me there?" "I have plenty of questions myself," she thought. But she could only get answers by returning home. Claire bought a ticket, waited for the train, and left. At home, a closed door and even closed gates awaited her. She couldn't enter her own home, even though she had her key. Clearly, no one had thought to remove it from her pocket. But that didn't help. The key didn't fit. The lock had been changed. Why? She hadn't been away for more than 3 days. When she left, everything with the lock was fine. Now she stood at the gates of her own home, unable to enter like a beggar. And she couldn't call her husband to ask what was happening. Her phone had been taken. When would he return home? Unknown, at any moment. But she couldn't just stand outside the door. She decided to go to his office. No car, no money for a taxi either. She decided to go and figure it out on the spot. If Dorian wasn't there, she could borrow from someone she knew. She didn't make it. She saw her husband near the office, outside some store, with another woman. They were embracing. Claire grabbed the driver by the shoulder. "Stop." They parted ways. Frightened by her probable hysterical shouting, he braked abruptly. She felt ashamed, but everything seemed justified. Try surviving so many wild events in just a few days, and then top it off by seeing your husband embracing someone else. She nearly jumped out of the car and rushed to Dorian. Without explanations, she slapped him and shouted, "Isn't it a bit early for you to bury me, you bastard?" "Claire, what, darling?" her husband stammered. His companion didn't run away but recoiled in horror. Claire glanced back at the taxi. She needed to pay, but there was no sign of the driver. He'd preferred to retreat. Who would want to deal with a woman dressed in a dirty sweatshirt, the same jeans, with unwashed tangled hair? Well, she couldn't explain to everyone that she had intentionally dressed for a hike, not expecting to have to lie on the ground in the forest and then be denied entry to her own home. Well, the taxi had driven off without her, and now she needed to sort things out with her husband. "What am I? What about you? Why are you cozying up to this frog here?" she demanded. "Claire, please, it's just work. We're colleagues." "I apologize, Emily Hills," he added, turning to his companion, who was quite attractive, by the way, and definitely not a frog. Then he turned back to his wife. "You're alive. My dear, I'm so happy. I didn't believe it, even though they found some remains in the car." "Remains of what? Me? Did you want to bury my charred socks or something they found there? My clothes are still on me, as you can see, and so are my jewelry." "Fine, if your embrace was purely professional, then excuse me, Emily, or whoever you are. We need to go to the police, because although they didn't kill me, they certainly wanted to. Dorian, let's go." Politely bidding farewell to his colleague, who still looked bewildered, Dorian followed Claire to the police station, trying to clarify things along the way. She had calmed down a bit, but she couldn't really explain what had happened. She didn't fully understand it herself. At the police station, she recounted everything that had occurred, omitting any mention of the father and son living in the woods. The investigator took her statement, opened a criminal case, and promised to get to the bottom of it all. Claire noticed her husband was nervous, which aroused her suspicion. When they left the station, she didn't hide it from Dorian. "I saw you on TV talking about what happened. You mentioned that I might have had a large sum of money with me. How did you know about that?" "What do you mean, how?" "You said it yourself, it was possible, so I mentioned that most likely it was the case. After all, you had money with you, didn't you? I just thought that would prompt a more active search." "And how did you recognize my belongings? Is this an interrogation now?" "I answered all the police's questions. As for recognizing, what could I recognize? They showed me a few charred items, and well, I said they could be yours. I didn't affirm anything, I just agreed. Besides, they were retrieved from your car. I don't understand why you're interrogating me like this. And what am I supposed to do? This is all so strange." "Well, let the police sort it out. But tell me, why did you change the locks at home?" "Well, isn't it clear? I was advised to do so because your presumed death was criminal, and the criminals are still at large. It's possible they would have come to our home to find something else, since they didn't find the keys in the car, not even charred ones. So, they must be with the criminals. I don't understand why you're interrogating me as if you suspect something, started a fight, embarrassed me in front of my colleague." But I apologized, even though I didn't fully understand why you need to hug colleagues with such a happy look, especially when your wife might have died. You know, I didn't believe you were dead, and now I really don't understand what we're talking about. Do you suspect me of something? What? I don't suspect you of anything, Dorian. If I had any concrete suspicions, I would tell you. Well, let's go home. I need to freshen up and relax. I need to start living again. The business is falling apart. I don't have time for suspicions. Let the police handle everything. In fact, she didn't like her husband's behavior. It was truly suspicious, but right now, she just wanted to relax. Claire suddenly realized that her feelings towards her husband had changed. She couldn't explain why, but somehow she couldn't trust him like she used to. She decided to postpone discussing this because she didn't have anything concrete yet, just a strong feeling that her husband was hiding something. Reflecting on this, Claire kept returning to thoughts of the people who seemed so genuine to her, the father and son living in the woods. She wanted to help them or at least see them again. And literally the next day, realizing she wasn't yet able to resolve her own issues, she began planning a trip to the woods. The first thing she needed to do was buy something that would please both of them. However, she didn't know what that might be, or even what games children Peter's age played, or what medications might help his father. So she mostly bought tasty and unusual foods that she was sure her new friends had never seen, along with a few books and toys for the boy. Understanding that these items might not fulfill their desires, Claire reassured herself that next time she would get exactly what they asked for. Upon arriving in the woods, Claire simply headed in the direction where she believed the cabin was, as promised to Peter. It was a long walk, and she now had a fairly heavy backpack on her back. At one point, Claire even doubted whether she might get lost and never reach her destination. But everything happened just as the boy had predicted. She was first greeted by wolves, and then Peter himself leaped out of the bushes. "Aunt Claire, you came." He ran up and hugged her, apparently doing so out of surprise, as he was usually quite reserved. Claire hugged him back and laughed happily. "Peter, I'm so glad to see you. I thought I was lost and would never make it." "Oh, don't be silly. I told you we would wait and welcome you. I didn't expect you to come so soon, but just in case, I went in this direction and also told the wolves to keep an eye out for you. Let's go home quickly. Dad will be very happy too." Zach expressed his emotions much more reservedly, but it was still evident that he was glad to see a familiar face from the outside world. Claire pulled out some treats from her backpack, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I didn't bring exactly what you needed. I didn't know what you would like or expect. I didn't think to ask last time, but I hope this isn't our last meeting." "We hope so too," Peter said, flipping through the books with interest. "We don't really know what we need, because I think we don't need anything special, we have everything. But really, thank you so much for all these unusual things. It was kind of you, although I'm sorry you went to so much trouble," said Zach. "I'll put the kettle on now, let's have lunch together. It's just a shame I didn't bring anything for the wolves. I just don't know what they like. I mean, I understand meat, for example. But it's really heavy to carry, so I left them without treats." "It's okay," Peter assured her. "They won't be offended, they know how to find food for themselves because they're predators. But they're happy to see you even without gifts. So are we, by the way." Claire understood that the boy was not accustomed to many things that were ordinary for other children, but he had friends that modern kids could only dream of. After lunch, Peter ran off to play with the wolves. He was used to always being around them and spending as much time communicating with them as possible. The adults didn't object, especially since they had their own conversation. Claire went into more detail with Zach about what had happened to her, also not hiding her suspicions about her husband. She also told him about her visit to the police. "But don't worry, Zach, I didn't mention you. I just said I spent the night in the woods. I understand you don't want to be found. Or do you still want that? You know, Claire? Maybe I do want to, but I'm even more afraid of it. You see, if they find Peter and me, they won't rush to help us. Most likely, they'll send me to some kind of care home and him to an orphanage. That's definitely not what we want, the man said again, frowning. I understand you perfectly, and you're probably right. But from the moment we met, all I've been thinking about is how to help both of you, to keep you together and at the same time change your lives for the better. I feel awkward imposing myself, and if you're against it, just say so. I won't do anything against your wishes. I just want you and Peter to be happy. As they discussed this serious matter, Claire walked around the house as usual. She couldn't sit still during serious conversations. Passing by the curtain that covered Zach's bed, she accidentally brushed against it and noticed a photograph of a beautiful woman hanging on the wall. She froze when she recognized the face. It was the same stranger her husband had hugged on the street. Zach noticed Claire's interest in the portrait and explained. This is my ex-wife, Peter's mother. Don't think I keep her portrait here and have it hanging out because I still love her. It's not like that, and I can't even say I loved her as a mother of my son should be loved. Maybe it's my fault she left. The portrait is just here. Honestly, I want Peter not to forget his mother, but for some reason, he's not interested in her at all. Probably because she never treated him like a mother should, and in the end, she left him. Oh, no need for explanations, Claire said, feeling embarrassed. I just saw a portrait of a beautiful woman, that's all. What's her name? Emily, came the expected answer. Claire decided not to mention that she had seen this woman very recently. She thought that perhaps she should first talk to Emily herself and find out why she abandoned her son. Making this decision, she informed Zach that she was already preparing to head back. I would love to stay longer, I really like it here, but I have to go. There are things at home, and I don't even know yet how they will turn out or end. Life turned out to be much more complicated than I imagined before. Yeah, I wasn't quite ready for this either. And about your attempts to change our lives, I'm not against it, but whatever you plan to do, please think it through properly. We don't want these changes to be for the worse. And in our case, it will probably end up that way. Claire promised to be very careful, said her goodbyes, and started her journey back. Peter, accompanied by the wolves as usual, saw her off, and they chatted about everything under the sun along the way. Claire kissed him goodbye again and said, Maybe I'll come back soon. I know the way better now, so you don't have to come to meet me. And I just thought that since I've been your guest so many times, it's time for you to visit me sometime. I hope you won't mind. No, of course not, the boy exclaimed happily. I'd love to, and Dad, I think you would too. It's just a shame we can't bring these guys along, he pointed to his four-legged friends. Yeah, I can imagine the shock all the neighbors would have, Claire laughed, waved, and headed towards the train station. Back in the city, she began her search for Emily. She didn't dare ask her husband directly, they had become rare conversationalists since the incident. It didn't seem like a quarrel, more like they both suspected something from each other. The only thing Claire knew about Emily was her full name and that she worked with Dorian at the same company. It was something, but it didn't make the situation any easier, as she didn't want to ask coworkers to avoid gossip. But she didn't have to. During her lunch break, Claire simply approached the office, and out came Caitlin, the secretary who considered herself the best friend of all the employees' wives. It was no surprise she rushed up to Dorian's wife with hugs and sympathy. Oh, Claire, I heard about your misfortunes. How are you? Are the villains being sought? I'm sure they'll find them and punish them. Our police are doing great. They showed in a new series, you know, they expose everyone in just 5 minutes. Don't worry and take more vitamins. You look so pale, you need to take care of yourself. Oh, and do you know what happened yesterday? Some pale girl came to work here, and suddenly, bam, she fainted. The ambulance came, took her to the hospital, and apparently, it's really bad there. Who was it? Not Lila, the blonde. Claire asked suspiciously, sensing that this meeting wasn't coincidental. Oh, no, Lila's fine, although she did go on a diet, of course. But it was Emily they took away. Oh, you probably know her. Caitlin bit her tongue, realizing she was talking about the wrong thing and the wrong person. Yes, I understand it's unpleasant for you, but you know, something's really wrong with her health. It's been bad for a long time. After saying goodbye to the talkative girl, Claire breathed a sigh of relief. She learned the surname of the woman she was interested in and where she was now. She didn't feel any sympathy for this Emily, remembering that she not only abandoned her sick husband and child, but also had a relationship with Claire's husband. She's ill? Not surprising. The boomerang has come back. Probably something women's, Claire thought. Well, why not visit the sick woman? And Claire headed to the hospital. She was let in, given sympathetic looks when she introduced herself as a relative. This already aroused some concern. Nevertheless, Claire didn't wish anything bad to this woman, but upon entering the ward, she realized how serious Caitlin's situation was. It wasn't surprising that people change after the portrait was made, which now adorned the wall of the forest hut. People change. But in a couple of days, she was so upset that it was a complete surprise. Claire didn't even immediately realize that the same woman was in front of her. Caitlin? She asked in surprise. Yes, pale gray lips curled into a weak smirk. That's me, Caitlin, your husband's mistress. You can rejoice now, you've won. Soon I'll be gone, and Dorian will be all yours. Why are you saying this? I didn't come here for that at all. I'm sure everything will be fine with you. Dorian and I are getting divorced, so you can be together. Claire deeply regretted coming to this unfortunate woman, whose days were likely numbered. But perhaps telling her that her son was alive and well would be a comfort to the dying woman. Stop it, no need to comfort me. I'm glad you know about your husband. Though it's strange that he fooled you for so long. We were a decent pair, but now it's all ending. For nearly 10 years, I hoped I could overcome this mess, but no. I'm not talking about Dorian. I wanted to ask, or rather tell you about your husband and your son. I saw them just yesterday. Do you remember them? Claire asked, tears welling up in her eyes from pity. I haven't lost my memory. Of course, I remember. They're not needed by me. Alive, well, that's it. Yes, Claire, Dorian and I were still together because such doormats surrounded us. You lived right under his nose, didn't see a thing. Zach believed me, Peter isn't his child. Didn't he suspect? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I gave birth to him by your husband. How could that have happened? The boy's already 8, Claire said in amazement. Well, so what? Dorian and I have known each other since school. I accidentally got caught. We certainly didn't plan to have children. Why do we need them? We were busy with scams and were very successful. There's no time for children. You understand that constant moves, and there, bang, pregnancy. And Dorian was just arrested. Well, yes, even the most successful fraudsters sometimes get caught. Thanks to me not being betrayed, on the contrary, I built a wall. And I quickly twisted Zach, while the stomach wasn't noticeable, well, Forrest. I think the child will be with his father for a while, and I'll sit in the backwoods for a while, and I won't be alone either. You agree, the argument? Dorian was sitting? Claire couldn't believe she didn't know her husband that badly. Well, yes, 3 years, even before meeting you, and this time with Zach sat, and with Peter. And when I was out, I decided that it was enough. And did you not want to be with your child? And now too, you know? Claire couldn't believe in what she was heard. Such indifference towards her own son struck Claire the most, yet Emily seemed not to care all that much. Her face darkened as she turned away, grimacing in agony. I already knew I was sick back then, so I didn't want him to get attached to me, knowing I wouldn't live long. So I left Zach when Dorian got out. And he met you sometime after. Do you think he fell in love? Ha, hold on to your wallet. Your business and money attracted him. We were together all this time, my friend, or should I say relative. Emily seemed exhausted from this conversation. She reclined against the pillows, breathing heavily. But we were cautious, since you didn't even suspect, so let's part without hard feelings. Now I don't have much time left, as you can see, so let's stay together for now. Go on, it's not good for me. But it can't stay this way. Maybe someone can help you. Do you need anything? Claire genuinely wanted to help the woman. I don't need anything, I've already gotten everything I deserved. Claire left, feeling heavy-hearted. She had learned too much new information that day. She didn't understand how to talk to her husband after this. Clearly, they couldn't be together, but if he was a fraud and married her only for money, then didn't he have something to do with the robbery that made her a victim? In that case, divorce wouldn't be the end of it. But she didn't see her husband that day. He didn't come home. Claire suspected he was at the hospital with his beloved. Indeed, that was the case. Emily died in his arms. Claire sincerely sympathized with the deceased young woman and even with her former husband. She participated in organizing the funeral, where only they, Dorian and some grandmother or hospital caretaker, were present. Dorian wept bitterly over the coffin. But soon he was arrested. The investigation was active, and it was already clear that he was the organizer of that robbery. Claire attended the interrogation or face-to-face confrontation, during which her ex-husband, without looking at her, confessed sincerely. I had a huge debt I lost in cards, and no one was going to forgive me. There was no money, and I found out that my wife was going to get a large sum. Hearing all this was unbearable for Claire. It turns out, Dorian not only organized the robbery, but also attempted to murder her. He wanted her not to be around, to be burned in that car, but the bandits decided not to take extra sins on their souls. That is, they carried her into the forest and tied her to a tree, hoping she would die of her own death or be eaten by wild animals, and at least that would happen not from their hands. Investigation was long and painful for Claire. Because of this, she avoided her acquaintances in the forest for a long time. Finally, at the end of summer, she visited Zach and Peter. She shared the sad news of Emily's death, acknowledging that the deceased had been his wife. However, she didn't mention that he was raising a non-biological son. But it turned out that Zach had known this from the very beginning. The news of Emily's death left him almost indifferent. That's it, he simply said, and asked, "Don't tell Peter, and I won't either for now. Maybe he'll find out on his own when he's ready. He's still young, and he's never really asked about her. Thanks to her, there's a lot he doesn't need to know. I knew I wasn't his father. We met when she was already pregnant, and she tried to convince me it was mine, but who would believe that when she gave birth 7 months after we met? But I saw how hard it was for her. She was alone. Yes, she told me about it when we met shortly before her death. And Peter's father is my ex-husband. That is, we hadn't met at that time, and now we've divorced and he's back in prison for a much longer term. But, really, it's better if Peter doesn't know. By the way, I have a proposal for you. I told you I wanted to help you get out of the forest and live in the city. I thought a lot about it, and here's what I have. There is a need for a security chief at my company, and I offer you this position with accommodation. We will arrange all the documents for you and your son, and he will go to school. What do you think? Are you kidding? What security chief? I'm in a wheelchair, in case you didn't notice, Zach chuckled. Yes, I noticed. But I'm talking about being a chief, not a guard. There won't be any need to guard anything. Just sit in the office, monitor everything on the screens, give orders to the guards. It's not that difficult, and the salary is good enough for you and your son. And you can come here in summer, like to a country house. Zach didn't hesitate long, but to make a final decision, he consulted his son. Peter's face turned serious. He liked this proposal less than his father did. First of all, he raised the most troubling question. But what about the wolves? We won't be able to take them with us, will we? Well, of course not. But they are free-spirited animals. They will live in the forest. And we will visit them, promised his father. But they'll miss us, and so will I, and I'll worry because hunters can come, and then. Well, hunters can come without us. Of course, it's great that you love animals so much, but you shouldn't give up your own life for their sake. After thinking for a while, Peter agreed, albeit reluctantly. He was worried about his friends, but he was even more afraid of the human life that his father and Claire were trying to tempt him with. School didn't seem so attractive to him at all, obeying teachers, interacting with other kids. He was used to something completely different. Claire understood this, and so did Zach, but they both realized that he needed to step out into the world. Soon, father and son moved to the city. Claire allocated 2 rooms for them in her house. By September 1st, Peter was enrolled in school. Zach started working. However, neither father nor son found any joy in these life changes. Zach understood that it was foolish to be ashamed of his disability, but he still felt very awkward in his wheelchair among ordinary people. Despite everyone treating him well, he felt uncomfortable. Perhaps it wasn't just because of his disability, but simply because he wasn't used to living among people. The city with its pace of life felt deeply unfamiliar to him, but he had a goal. He dreamed of saving enough money for an operation. When he was in the hospital after being wounded, doctors had said recovery was possible, but it required treatment, and treatment cost money, which they didn't have, nor did they have hope of earning it. But now, thanks to his new position, that hope had emerged. Zach realized he needed to readjust to normal life, from which he had become estranged during his years in the forest. For Peter, it was even more difficult. He hadn't become unaccustomed to anything because he had never known normal life, and he had to learn everything. He entered school with an open heart, hoping, as Aunt Claire and Dad promised, to find new friends with whom life would be just as interesting as with the wolves. But it turned out differently. The boy didn't hide anything. He told the other children where and how he had lived before, told them about his 4-legged friends, but instead of friendship, he received mockery. His life seemed quite strange to the regular kids. Some thought he was just making it up and had never had tame wolves, that he had just lived somewhere in a remote village. Peter immediately got the nickname Mowgli and was called that, which hurt the boy deeply. Physically well-developed, he could stand up for himself if necessary, which made the other children wary of teasing him too much, but no one wanted to be friends with him either. In school, Peter restrained himself, tried to act independently, but when he got home, he often cried. Seeing him in tears, Claire asked him one day what was wrong, and Peter honestly replied, "You shouldn't have brought us here. I miss the wolves. Winter is coming soon, and it'll be cold for them, and they're still so young. Besides, I'm afraid of hunters and mean people. And during the holidays, we'll definitely go visit the forest, and you'll see them. I'm sure everything will be fine with them. Wolves aren't domestic dogs that disappear without people. Besides, they are smart and sensitive. They know perfectly well how to avoid dangers." Claire tried to comfort him. "Yeah, maybe," Peter agreed, "but I feel bad here myself, like I'm a wolf that ended up in the city and can't find its place among people. I don't like any of this. I don't like school. I don't like the kids either. I haven't found any friends and probably never will, just enemies." "You'll definitely find friends, I'm sure. You're just not used to it yet, and they're not used to you. After all, you're from completely different places. It's not strange that you didn't immediately like it here, but in reality, it's good here. But don't you see that it's much more convenient to live here for both you and your dad?" These arguments slightly reassured Peter, and Claire hoped that gradually the boy would get used to it. It seemed a bit easier with Zach. He quickly settled into his job, and although he didn't socialize much, he didn't experience any negativity either, or perhaps he just hid it. After all, he was a man, not a little boy, and it was understandable that he would be ashamed to complain. Claire would have gladly helped them both, but she understood they were proud people, and offending them with her excessive help would hurt them, although she really wanted to help, especially Zach. She had already consulted with doctors and knew that an operation would help him, but she couldn't just give away money. She knew he would refuse. Zach quickly immersed himself in the job, observed the work of the entire team, and eventually noticed that something suspicious was brewing. Several employees, clearly conspiring, seemed to be plotting to bankrupt Claire. Timing the malefactors correctly, Zach managed to prevent serious danger. Claire was delighted with the timely actions of the security chief and, in gratitude, finally decided to offer to pay for his operation. "I really urge you, Zach, don't refuse," she pleaded with him. "Just take this as a bonus. You understand that if you hadn't noticed in time, I would have lost much more." "Claire, but this is just my job." "I appreciate your gesture, but the reward should be appropriate, and you're offering an amount that I wouldn't earn in many years, even with all bonuses." Zach predictably refused. "Don't exaggerate." "Well, if you're refusing the gratitude, then let this amount be considered a loan. You can repay it with each paycheck, that's all. I know very well that you're saving up specifically for the operation. So let's get it done now. I value your pride, but we need to be practical." "Okay, I agree with you, but aren't you celebrating too early that the conspiracy was exposed? After all, the instigators haven't been identified yet. You could have given this reward after I fully figured out the case. You'll figure it out much faster when you're on your own feet. And that will only happen after the operation. And don't you understand that you're needed not only at work but also healthy for your son?" Zach agreed and checked into the hospital. Perhaps it was premature. Taking advantage of his absence, the conspirators decided to pressure Claire and finally force her to sign documents for ownership of the company, and it was easiest to do this with Peter's help. One day, the boy was kidnapped and taken in an unknown direction. At first, Peter was frightened. He was roughly grabbed and put in the back seat of a car and told to be quiet. But the kidnappers themselves were not silent, apparently not fearing anything. "Where should we keep him? He might escape or raise a commotion. We can't tie him up." "No worries, I know a place. An old hunter used to live there, very principled, but I shot him down so he wouldn't get in the way during hunting. I don't know what happened to him, but his cabin is still there, with no people around. Yell or don't yell, it doesn't matter." And Peter realized they were taking him to their house with his father. This reassured him because he knew the surroundings well, and he also had loyal friends there. Soon, he got to meet the kidnappers. They couldn't drive through the forest in the car, so they had to go on foot, but not for long. The wolves ran out of the forest upon hearing the boy's call, quickly understanding what was happening, and attacked his enemies. Then all Peter had to do was use the kidnappers' phone to call for help, as well as an ambulance, as the kidnappers were seriously injured. Peter was taken home, right into the arms of Claire, who couldn't wait to tell him the joyful news: his dad's operation had been successful. Returning home, Zach found his son and Claire, who were now not just friends but family. He himself faced a long rehabilitation, during which his relationship with Claire became closer. A year later, at their wedding, he confidently walked with a cane. And soon it turned out that there was even more motivation for a speedy recovery. His young wife announced that they would soon have a baby.